It was the kind of October morning that only central Alberta can produce. The sky a pale, scrubbed blue, the frost still clinging to the grass in the shadows where the sun hadn't quite reached, and the smell of diesel and cold metal hanging over the vehicle compound like something permanent. The kind of morning where you could hear your own breath. Type respect in the comments if you believe the old ones still carry what no manual ever could. Corporal Travis Hennessey had been staring at the engine compartment of the LAV for 47 minutes. He knew the exact number because he'd checked his watch at the start, the way his section commander had taught him, and he'd been checking it every few minutes since, each glance adding a little more weight to the knot sitting behind his sternum. The vehicle was due for a readiness inspection at 0930. It was now 0842. The LAV wasn't going anywhere. The problem wasn't exotic. That was the humiliating part. It was a fuel feed issue somewhere between the secondary filter housing and the injection manifold. At least, that was what Travis had concluded after consulting the technical manual 3 times, cross-referencing 2 different sections, and still arriving at nothing useful. The manual told him what the components were called. It told him tolerances and specifications and torque values. What it did not tell him was why the engine turned over, caught for a half second as though it genuinely intended to cooperate, and then died with the kind of finality that suggested it had made a deliberate choice. Warrant Officer Kim Braddock had looked at it. Master Corporal Stephanie? No, Travis caught himself. Wrong name. That was someone else's memory. He shook his head. Master Corporal Ewan had looked at it. 2 of the vehicle techs from the maintenance platoon had crouched over it with their own manuals and their own theories, and then retreated with their hands in their pockets, muttering about requisitioning a diagnostic kit from Wainwright. The LAV sat there in the weak autumn sun, silent and enormous and completely indifferent to Travis's career. He was 23 years old. He'd been in the Canadian Army for 14 months. He was good with weapons, solid on his radio procedures, and possessed of the kind of physical endurance that made the older soldiers in his section respect him, even when they didn't particularly like him. He was not, it turned out, good with engines. He hadn't known this about himself until now, and the discovery felt personal in a way he hadn't expected. She always did have a stubborn streak, that one. The voice came from behind him, and Travis turned so fast he nearly knocked the technical manual off the fender where he'd balanced it. The man standing at the edge of the vehicle bay was old, not merely retired-looking or grey-templed old, but genuinely, irreversibly old in the way that suggested he had been alive during things that Travis had only read about in school. He was perhaps 75, perhaps older, with a face like weathered spruce bark and eyes that were a very clear, very pale grey. He wore a canvas work jacket the colour of old moss, a pair of dark trousers with a crease in them that seemed almost aggressive in its precision, and boots that had been resoled at least twice but polished to a standard that most soldiers Travis knew didn't bother with anymore. He had a Tim Hortons cup in one hand. He was looking at the LAV with an expression that Travis could only describe as recognition. "Sorry," Travis said, because he didn't know what else to say. "This is a restricted area, sir. Can I help you with something?" The old man didn't answer immediately. He took a slow sip of his coffee and continued studying the vehicle with the unhurried attention of someone who had all the time in the world and knew exactly how to use it. "My granddaughter is in supply," he said finally. "Corporal Merritt. I'm waiting for her. They said to wait outside, but it's cold outside." He said this without apology, as though the coldness of outdoors was a fact he'd noted and declined to accept. "I used to work on these." Travis looked at him. "The LAV? The old ones, the 25s before your time." The old man took another sip of coffee. "What's she doing?" Travis hesitated. He was technically responsible for keeping unauthorized personnel out of the vehicle bay. He was also a corporal with a 47-minute problem that was about to become an 88-minute problem. And the man in front of him had just said the words, "I used to work on these," with the casual confidence of someone stating that they used to breathe air. "Fuel feed," Travis said. "She turns over, catches, then quits. Can't find the fault." The old man nodded slowly, the way people nod when information confirms something they already suspected. He walked toward the vehicle. His gait was unhurried but not shuffling. There was something deliberate about the way he moved, as though each step was a small decision made consciously rather than automatically. Travis noticed he favoured his left side slightly, the weight of old injuries redistributed over decades into something that had become simply the way he stood in the world. He set his Tim Hortons cup on top of the tool cart with the calm authority of a man who does not ask permission before setting things down, and he looked into the engine compartment. Travis said nothing. Something made him stay quiet. The old man looked at the engine for a long time without touching it. He looked at it the way Travis had seen his grandfather look at a field before deciding whether to seed it, or the way experienced hunters looked at a tree line, not searching frantically, but waiting for something to make itself known. After perhaps 2 full minutes, he reached in with one hand and pressed down on the secondary filter housing just slightly, then released it. He listened. Travis couldn't hear anything. He wasn't sure what there was to hear, but the old man's head tilted just slightly, the way a dog's does when it catches a sound at the edge of its range. "Microfracture in the seal housing," the old man said. "Not enough to leak, just enough to pull air when the engine warms up. Your injection manifold's fine. Your filter's fine. The manual won't show you this because it's not supposed to happen." Travis stared at him. How can you tell that just by pressure drop?" The old man straightened up and retrieved his coffee. "You can't see it, but when she fires and dies that fast, with that particular catch in the middle, it's almost always that seal. The engine's getting just enough fuel to think it can run, and then the air bleed drops the pressure and she quits. Same thing every time, same feeling." Travis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The techs couldn't find it. Did they feel it? They used their diagnostic checklist." The old man looked at him with those pale grey eyes. It was not an unkind look, but it was direct in a way that some people are only when they have lived long enough to have stopped being polite at the expense of being honest. "The checklist tells you what to look for," he said. "Doesn't tell you what to feel for. Different skill. Takes longer to learn." Tr wanted to ask how long. He wanted to ask a lot of things. Instead, he said, "Can it be fixed here, or does she need to go to maintenance? Seal replacement. You'll have it done before your inspection if you start now." The old man pointed, not to a component Travis had looked at, but to a spot 3 centimeters to the left of where he'd been looking for 47 minutes. "There." And he picked up his coffee and walked back to the plastic chair near the bay entrance and sat down and seemed to have finished with the whole business. Travis found the fracture. It was tiny, a hairline crack in the rubber of the seal housing, invisible to a visual inspection unless you knew where to direct a very strong light at a very specific angle. It would not have shown up on the standard diagnostic protocol because the standard diagnostic protocol did not test for microfractures in secondary housings, on the grounds that secondary seal housings were not technically a common failure point, which was true. They were just, apparently, an occasional one. Master Corporal Yoon stood beside Travis as he made the replacement and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Where'd you find it?" Travis nodded toward the old man by the door. Yoon looked at him. The old man was sitting with his coffee, watching a sparrow that had found its way into the bay and was investigating the tool cart with great professional interest. He appeared completely unconcerned with what was happening to the LAV. "Who is he?" Yoon asked. "Says his granddaughter's in supply. Corporal Merritt." Yoon's expression shifted slightly. Not much. Yoon was not a person who made dramatic faces, but enough that Travis noticed. "Her grandfather," Yoon said. It was not quite a question. "You know him?" "No," Yoon said, "but I know of him." He looked at the old man again, with something Travis couldn't quite read, not quite reverence, not quite recognition, but something between the two, the way you might look at a building you'd heard a great deal about before you saw it for the first time. "Go ask him if he wants another coffee." His name was Clifton Merritt, and he did not volunteer information about himself. Travis brought him a coffee, double, on instinct, because that was what his own grandfather drank. And the old man accepted it with a nod and shifted slightly in his chair to make room for the conversation that he understood, without being told, was about to happen. "How long were you in?" Travis asked. A pause. "Long enough. What did you do?" Another pause, different in quality from the first. This one wasn't evasion. It was the pause of someone deciding where to begin, or whether to begin, or how much of a beginning to offer. "Vehicle systems, mostly. Some time on the guns. Korea, the tail end of it. And then a few other places that don't make the news as often." Travis did the math without meaning to. Korea ended in 1953. The man sitting in front of him was old enough to have been there as a young soldier. He would have been, Travis calculated, perhaps 1920 at most. My grandfather was in Korea, Travis said. He never talked about it either. Clifton Merritt looked at him. Something moved through those grey eyes. Not quite grief, not quite warmth, but some compound emotion that Travis didn't have a name for yet, though he suspected he might someday. They never do, the old man said. The ones who were really there. The Sparrow had relocated to the top of the LAV and was investigating something in the turret ring with the focused intensity of a quality control inspector. Both men watched it for a moment. The engine thing, Travis said, because he couldn't help it. The feel for it. How do you learn that? Clifton Merritt was quiet long enough that Travis thought he might not answer. Then he said, you put your hands on the machine. Every day. For years. Not to fix it, just to know it. There's a thing that happens when you've worked on enough engines. You stop hearing the problem and you start hearing the normal. And when normal changes, even a little, you feel it before you know what it is. He turned the coffee cup slowly in his hands. The manual's written by engineers. Engineers know how machines are supposed to work, but soldiers know how machines actually work. Those are different things. Travis was quiet. You'll get there, Clifton Merritt said. It didn't sound like encouragement exactly, or if it did, it was the dry, factual kind. The kind that says this is simply what will happen rather than I'm trying to make you feel better. If you keep your hands on the machine and stop being afraid of not knowing. I wasn't afraid, Travis said, and then he heard himself say it and felt the slightly hollow sound of it. The old man didn't argue. He just drank his coffee. The LAV fired on the first attempt at 0921. The engine turned over, caught, held, and then settled into its deep idle as though the last 47 minutes, 47 plus 40 now, nearly 90 minutes total, had never happened. The sound of it filled the vehicle bay and bounced off the concrete walls, and 3 people who heard it turned their heads, and one of the vehicle techs who had walked away muttering earlier actually came back to the bay door to look. Travis sat in the driver's hatch for a moment with his eyes closed and listened to the engine run. When he climbed down, Clifton Merritt was still in his chair. He had not moved to see. He seemed to have known, without needing to verify it, that the repair had worked. His granddaughter appeared in the bay door at 0928. Corporal Jessica Merritt, supply tech, who had her grandfather's grey eyes in a younger face and who stopped dead when she saw the old man sitting calmly in a plastic chair inside the vehicle bay with 2 Tim Hortons cups beside him. Grandpère, she said, you're not supposed to be in here. I was cold, he said. You are Canadian. You're not cold. I'm 76, he said. I've earned the right to be cold. She kissed the top of his head the way you do when someone is old enough that small gestures of tenderness have become a habit. Then she looked at Travis with an expression that mixed apology with a kind of fondness that suggested this was not the first time her grandfather had ended up somewhere he was technically not supposed to be. Did he behave himself? She asked. Travis glanced at the LAV, running now, warm, ready for the inspection that was 9 minutes away. Then he looked at Clifton Merritt, who was watching the Sparrow again, as though the question of whether he'd behaved himself was not particularly relevant to anything. He helped me find a fault that 3 of us couldn't find, Travis said. Corporal Merritt looked at her grandfather for a moment with an expression that Travis didn't quite have the context to read. Then she looked back at Travis. Yeah, she said quietly. He does that. The inspection went fine. Lieutenant Owens walked the line at 0932, checked the vehicle status board, listened to the engine idle, and moved on without comment, which in the language of military inspections meant everything was acceptable. Travis stood beside the LAV and felt for the first time that morning that the particular knot behind his sternum had fully released. Clifton Merritt had gone by then. Travis had walked back into the bay to look for him around 0929 and found only 2 empty Tim Hortons cups and the plastic chair pushed back exactly as it had been before anyone sat in it. He thought about that for the rest of the day in the odd moments between tasks. The precision of the pushback chair, the 2 empty cups left neatly together rather than scattered, small, careful habits. The kind of habits you develop over years of living in places where you clean up after yourself because the alternative is chaos. He asked Master Corporal Yoon that afternoon what he'd meant when he said he'd heard of Clifton Merritt. Yoon was filling out vehicle maintenance logs and didn't look up right away. When he did, he was quiet for a moment in the way of someone choosing words. He was a warrant officer, Yoon said. Vehicle Systems Specialist. He spent time with the 1st Battalion in the early 80s when things were complicated. Peacekeeping in a few places where the peace kept needing to be put back together. He put his pen down. There was a situation in 82. Armoured column, bad road, worse timing. Something happened with one of the lead vehicles and it blocked the column at a very wrong moment in a very wrong place. Everybody else's diagnosis was, it's the engine, it's shot, we need to call it. Merritt found the fault in about 4 minutes, some kind of hydraulic thing that nobody else had seen, because it was a combination of factors that wasn't in any manual. Ewan picked up the pen again. They got the column moving. I heard from someone who was there that the 4 minutes Merritt saved was the reason the column got through the window they had. Things could have gone very differently. Travis said nothing. He doesn't talk about it, Ewan said. His granddaughter doesn't even know the details. That's the kind of thing he was. That's what it is. He shrugged, but it wasn't an indifferent shrug. It was the shrug of someone who has tried and failed to find larger words for something and decided that the smaller ones would have to do. Some people just know their machine. Travis thought about asking Corporal Merritt if her grandfather would come back. He didn't. It felt like the wrong kind of asking, too forward, too much like trying to extract something that wasn't his to extract. But 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon when the wind off the fields had a real edge to it and the vehicle bay smelled of oil and cold concrete, he was doing his scheduled maintenance check on the same LAV when he heard the distinctive sound of deliberate, unhurried footsteps and looked up to find Clifton Merritt standing at the edge of the bay again. No coffee this time, just the old man, hands in his jacket pockets looking at the vehicle. Her hydraulic hoses, Travis said. I've been going over them. The front left feels different from the others. Clifton Merritt walked over and stood beside him. He looked at the hose that Travis indicated. He pressed it with 2 fingers, the same way a doctor presses to test for tenderness, and was quiet. Not yet, he said. Another 3 months, maybe 4. But you're right to watch it. How do I know when it's ready to go? The old man considered this. It'll feel softer, he said. A little flat, like pressing the back of your hand instead of your palm. You'll know it when you feel it, once you've felt enough hoses. He glanced at Travis. You felt it before I confirmed it. Travis didn't say anything, but something settled in him, some small, solid thing. Same time next week? Travis said, which surprised himself slightly. Clifton Merritt looked at him with those pale grey eyes. Something moved through them that Travis had learned, in the past 2 weeks of thinking about it, might be the particular pleasure of an old teacher who has been waiting for a student to ask the right question. I'll bring the coffee, the old man said. 6 weeks after that first October morning, Master Corporal Ewan submitted a formal recommendation to the CO. It was a brief document, 1 page single-spaced, the way Ewan did everything, and it requested that Clifton Merritt, former warrant officer, retired, be offered a formalised advisory role in the vehicle maintenance mentorship program that the battalion had been trying to stand up for 2 years without adequate expertise. The CO signed it in the same meeting it was presented. The base commander approved it by end of week. Nobody told Clifton Merritt about the recommendation before it was approved. Travis had wondered whether they should, and Ewan had said no. Tell him after, when he can't talk them out of it, and Travis had understood that this too was a form of knowing a person, knowing where their resistance lives and working around it, not to deceive them, but because some things need to be decided by the people who understand their value before the person in question is given the chance to deflect. When Travis told him, Clifton Merritt sat with it for a moment in the plastic chair near the bay entrance. The same chair Travis was fairly certain that had migrated inside from the cold and never quite made it back out again. Advisory role, the old man repeated. Mentorship program, vehicle systems. They want you to work with the techs and the drivers, anyone who's willing to learn. Clifton Merritt looked at the LAV, idling now, running clean and warm. I'm 76, he said. Yes, sir, Travis said. I have bad mornings. The program runs afternoon sessions. The old man was quiet. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Double, because Travis had learned that much by now, and looked at the floor, and then at the vehicle, and then at Travis. The hydraulic hose, he said. Front left. You need to pull it in February regardless. Don't wait for the feel. Schedule it. Yes, sir, Travis said. Does that mean you're saying yes? Clifton Merritt stood up. He was slower rising than Travis's grandfather had been, near the end, and Travis stood back and gave him the space to do it, without help being offered. which was another thing he'd learned these past weeks without being told. Some dignities are not assisted. The old man straightened up. He looked at Travis for a moment with those eyes that had seen things Travis couldn't imagine, that had diagnosed faults in the dark and in the cold, and in places where the manual was not applicable and the cost of guessing wrong was permanent. "February," he said. "I'll be here." He walked out of the vehicle bay into the Alberta afternoon, where the frost had gone from the grass and the sun was lower than it had any right to be for 3 in the afternoon, and the diesel smell followed him out into the open air. Travis stood beside the LAV and listened to the engine run. He put his hand on the chassis, just above the fuel line housing, and felt the vibration of it move up through his palm. Steady even, the particular rhythm of a machine that knows it's being heard. He stood like that for a while, just listening.